In all seriousness, I got to know Adler through the Institute for Social Inclusion and Lynn Todman. In 2012, I spoke to a class about who has access to the American dream. I talked about the relocation and displacement of Chicago public housing residents to an engaged group of students. The last time I interviewed Dr. Todman was around her research on mental health impact assessments on Black male job seekers with criminal records in Chicago. These interactions and knowing the type of students Adler has made me even more honored to talk to you today. Many of you graduating are passionate about social justice. Adler has a long history of being a pioneer in this field, and it's a practice that's taken seriously. You're prepared, you're ready. But today, I also want to let you know some of the pitfalls in doing social justice work. You have been trained to be socially responsible, yet even the most woke people can make mistakes. I have a few tips to help you navigate. Let me start by telling you one of mine. When I first moved back to Chicago 12 years ago, I was assigned a cover story for the Chicago Reporter, an investigative magazine covering race and poverty. My assignment was to do a history of the Robert Taylor homes. This was the world's largest public housing development. I'm from here and had always seen these 28 buildings lying like a wall along the Dan Ryan Expressway. These were places that had disinvestment, crime, open-air drug markets. And I went into the last building that was about to come down. And I interviewed one of the last residents who lived there. And I asked her, "Are you happy to be leaving?" And she said no. And that surprised me. When I walked into the lobby, it smelled like urine. The elevator seemed like a death trap. I knew that this was a place that the city did not care about. And I asked her that question again, and she said she wasn't happy to leave. And I had to quickly readjust. I could keep asking her that same question and imposing my own values on her. But that would have taken away from her telling me her own story. And even though it's really cliche, there's no place like home. I learned to listen to people. We are all subjective. We all bring our biases into the world, and that's okay. They give us perspective, but when do we put them in check? Especially when we are interacting with people who had different upbringings. There are places that I have lived where people might have said, "How in the world could you live there?" So be sure to listen. Secondly, understand the difference between individuals and structures. As a journalist, I routinely have to fact check my analysis. As counselors, art therapists, public policy practitioners, and leaders, it is important that you and we critique problems in our society. Individuals exist in the cog of structure, so I don't want to minimize people. But there are too many armchair psychologists, none here of course, who try to make sense of actions without a broader view. For example, if a police officer kills someone who is unarmed and didn't appear to be a threat, there's a lot of speculation about the psychology of the officer. What was going on in that officer's head? Fair question. But the personal has to zoom out to the structural. What are the institutional power structures that need to be critiqued or changed? Yes, that's one officer, but that officer doesn't exist in a vacuum. What are the social norms of the police department? What are the protocols? We see the same pattern with shooters who are not law enforcement. We can get clues about individuals if we spend time with and pay attention to the structures. The list goes on and on. Sexual assault, politics, any type of ism. They all need rigorous analysis. The structure I focus on the most in my reporting is segregation. As a journalist covering housing, economic development, or for that matter, any issue in Chicago, my reporting would fall flat without the understanding of that system and how it shapes just about everything here in the region. Tied with the idea of individualism is exceptionalism. This American ideal has its own set of pitfalls. When we see a person overcome some type of hardship, We wonder why others who endured the same trauma can't do the same. That can lead to blaming and the shaming of others. I see this trope with lauding people who made it out the hood. We uphold one person against thousands. That perspective lets structures off the hook. We blame those thousands of people for their conditions and unduly put pressure on that one person who so-called made it. Another tip I want to impart is understand language. We can peddle stereotypes even when we don't intend to do so. We must fend off coded language, dog whistles, classes, and anti-people of color rhetoric. Faulty language cripples imagination and creativity. Wrong words also dehumanize people and their experiences. I know this firsthand, not only covering Black communities, but growing up in one. These communities are often characterized in terms of their deficits and not their assets. For example, vacant land is used to describe empty lots on the south or west sides. But we call empty land open space in the suburbs. See the difference? One sounds foreboding, the other promising. Welfare queens, inner city, food stamps, gang-related are all euphemisms for Black and brown people in cities. Illegal aliens sounds like space cadets from Mars who forgot their green cards. Blue collar and working class have a silent W in front of them, as if Black and brown people aren't working class or blue collar. It erases them when they weathered deindustrialization just as long as if not longer. Quick turns of phrases or overused words allow people to fill in the blanks with their own baggage. I too have had to challenge myself over labels and language. Prostitute or sex worker? Well, that depends on who I'm interviewing. I've used both terms wrong based on feedback. I've now learned to use the appropriate language by asking women, survivors, and activists what they prefer. I have to balance this knowing how awful and real sex trafficking is in the city and the suburbs, but I also understand some people want to be in the sex industry. So I've tried to stay away from nouns and use verbs instead. I'm sure most of you have heard the term food desert, an area overrun with junk food and not enough full-service grocery stores. Food justice advocates started pushing back on that term because they felt like it didn't do justice to the structures in these neighborhoods, and it was misleading. Deserts aren't bad places in our ecology, and there is food in those places. I've even lived in one, so I thought that I knew what I was quoting. Over the years, my reporting around food deserts really evolved into covering urban agriculture and activism around food justice. Two women here who work in those areas challenged me. They shape that using an ecosystem to describe food. Lack of healthy food is just one issue around under-resourced communities. The food system is unequal, and capitalism and racism help shape that system. I am still learning and reading scholarship from people who know more than me in this field. Again, looking at structures. I've also moved away from the word minority. Yes, there are more white people in this country than other races, but majority and minority perpetuate inequity by lumping groups together using lesser than language. In Chicago, our population is roughly a third Black, Latino, and white each. Then why refer to people of color as minorities? Let's talk about power structure in our political and neighborhood systems instead. Okay, I know I just went full-fledged wonky in this speech, but I'm sharing these stories with you to be transparent about my own bumps in the road. While we don't want to actively make mistakes, we are human, and we don't want to miss an opportunity to learn from them. When you know better, you do better. I like to think of my work as a journey, and I think each of you in this graduating class should consider that as well. I am sometimes asked by people what they can do to change society, eradicate racism, be a social justice warrior. They expect a neat answer with bullet points. That's not how life works. Being a change agent isn't done in one fell swoop. By virtue of your profession, you have the tools to help change your community, your city, your country. But don't fall into a savior mentality. We are not here to save people. We have to defy ego too. Be humble. Make it about the work, not your impact. Finally, as I was writing this speech, I asked my 14-year-old stepdaughter what makes a good graduation speech. She sat through a lot of them. She told me to tell you, the time is now. You've studied, but your life will be different after graduation. I think that's pretty good advice. I know Adler has prepared you well. In the beginning, I listed a bunch of cliches that I would not say, including don't go change the world, but I take that back. Today, you are armed to change the world, to help people and to heal communities. I commend you, I celebrate you, and wish you luck. Thank you.